All right, everybody, this is Chris and Bart, and we are here with Howard Hitchcock, the CEO of Lionel Racing. Howard, thanks for joining us this evening. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. I'm glad to be on the show.
Awesome. Well, we wanted to start out a little bit and give everybody a picture of who you are. And we know that you've been a part of this collecting business for 15 years or more now. And so we wanted to see, and it's kind of a question that we ask all the race car drivers, was this the dream? Were you collecting these things when you were a kid, or did you kind of fall into the industry and develop a passion for it?
So I grew up in New Jersey, and now Truex is from Southern Jersey. So there's somebody in the sport from Jersey. But prior to that, Wally Dallenbach actually grew up in a town not too far from where I grew up. But racing wasn't the biggest thing in New Jersey. It was a little more Southern, a little more Midwest. But I had a cousin who was really into racing. And so we would watch these races, and you had the old cable selector. You had to move the notches and click the buttons. And somewhere buried down in like row 3, way over to the right, you'd find a race. And, I was a fan of Dale Earnhardt, Dale Sr., and just loved his aggressive style and just how he approached races, and got to be a fan. I'm a collector by nature. I can't say that I was a collector back when I was a youth of Diecast, but I collected other things, as kids do, coins, stamps at the time. I have different collections now of other things. I can't say I didn't envision myself being this guy, but at the same time, I'm in a path that I targeted to be in, which is product. So coming out of school, okay, I got an internship out of my college with Johnson & Johnson Consumer Products, and also in New Jersey, they're big up there, and got to working in a role. It was really a laboratory role, but we were working on the development of new products to support the marketing effort. And so I started to see how the process works for developing things that people consume. And so all of my jobs out of college since then have been related to product development. I've done everything from fine dinnerware that many of your wives would probably know about, registering for the bridal pattern type thing. That was my first job out of college. Very cool for a young 20-something-year-old. To Waterford Crystal, where I built a lot of cool stuff. I participated in creating the ball that fell in Times Square in the year 2000, and have done collectibles since. Everything from little resin figurines, ceramics, Hummels, plates. NASCAR was a big part of it. And in 2006, I came up to North Carolina from Florida. I was living in Florida at the time, and came up here to be part of the Diecast team. There I was responsible for the Diecast under different companies' names, but the same product. Now I'm the CEO of all of Lionel, so I have the trains as well as the cars. So the cars are part of my responsibility. But my passion is working with the product teams, the marketing teams, and bringing things to life that are just awesome, and people love them, and you really get a rewarding sense for that.
Yeah, and that was kind of our next question is, could you give us a little insight into not only how the business became so collectible? When we talked a couple of weeks ago, you told us about some awesome collections, but how Lionel got into the sport. I know it's been a little bit more recent, but it's been around so long.
Sure.
What was Lionel's path into Diecast?
Yeah, so Lionel is celebrating its 120th year this year. Of making trains and collectibles. And we certainly would be considered a collectible product, as well as sort of a mainstay product, something that you would find even at your mass level stores for celebrating the holidays as part of a decoration. But Lionel came into the picture in around 2010. Actually, that was the official timing, a little bit before that in the background. And so I was with Motorsports Authentics at the time, which was the merged company from Action Performance and Team Caliber. And at that point, we had Motorsports Authentics had the responsibility for all of the trackside merchandise, pretty much all the apparel. There was a couple of small companies doing some T-shirts. most of the hard goods stuff, all of the diecast. And so we oversaw that. And so there was sort of a big shift in the licensing world for NASCAR. And for those that don't know, most most of the time when you go to these big leagues, you sort of get the league as part of your contract. So you go to the NFL, you get the teams, the team signature or the logos, the name. There's usually a players association. So if you want to do specific stuff, you actually need the players association as well as the NFL, but you're kind of dealing with two contracts. In the diecast world in particular, it's a little more complicated because at the time there was NASCAR as a license, the entity. If you wanted to put a track on it, you had to get the track's rights. Driver, team, and sponsor typically would come as a package deal, but you still had to go get that as another right. You had the OEM, which is your car manufacturer, so the Chevy, Ford, Toyota, Dodge at the time. And then if you had a third party, like a movie or a special property, that would have to be layered on top of it. So from a licensing construct perspective, it's extremely complicated. It's actually the most complicated sort of setup I've seen. And it's fractional, like when you're paying royalties, depending on where you sell and what you sell, it's sort of fractional. So the whole notion was, let's bring all this together. Let's reset the field. The teams came together. They formed what they called the licensing trust. And at the time there was a shift in the business. Motorsports Authentics was essentially becoming just the trackside operator. And so all the other pieces of the business were moving to other partners. And so NASCAR was seeking someone who had some experience in diecast. The leadership at the time of Lionel had some background with NASCAR. And, at the end of the day, where our products are manufactured, we actually also make trains. So it was really a very nice synergy in terms of we already had a representation in the factory. Honestly, diecast has taught the train side a little bit about how to decorate things a little more complicated. Conversely, the diecast side has gotten some benefits on some technology effects, with things for the car side of the business. And then from a business perspective, they actually pace out very nicely because, as you could imagine, trains with Christmas are very heavy Q3, Q4 oriented. So a lot of activity going on in the warehouse and a lot of activity around the sort of holiday season where the collector side of the diecast actually sort of peaks with Daytona. So there's a mad rush. Really, we start developing paint schemes now, ideally, for what would be the launch or the kickoff of the season, which is Daytona. So NASCAR is a little bit unique in that it starts its season with sort of its Super Bowl or big game,
right?
Sport as the first event, whereas obviously all the other sports sort of lead up into that culmination of the big event. And not that there aren't others along the way, but certainly Daytona has just such cachet. You want your cars to be there. It was a little easier when there used to be less paint schemes per driver. Now we've got a lot of drivers who, have many paint schemes. Right. So we always try to offer, the majority of these paint schemes out there, and really move the build to order model into place so that we really wanted to protect the industry and we wanted to protect the collector. We didn't really want a glut of product in the market being discounted. We wanted that residual value there for the collector. So that was the whole impetus for that.
So I think you just blew everybody's mind. I don't think anybody's ever going to look at a car again, a diecast car, and say, "Oh, that's pretty simple, little car there."
Yeah, it's much more complex than it seems. I have a licensing guy who works for me who is a grand wizard at how to take our sales, dump them into an Excel. We're getting to the point where we need access and sort of like, manipulating it and spitting it out in the right way and remarkably accurate, which is awesome.
Well, so I would say Lionel really took diecast and made it something good, great. So took it from good to great. But there was some OGs of this back in the day. So a guy named Fred Wagenhall, I believe his name is. Yep. And even big guys like Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon. Can you tell us a little bit about how those guys had to play in the collectibles business?
Sure. So Fred was an entrepreneur and really started action performance. And he saw sort of with the advent of the Days of Thunder timing. There was another company called Racing Champions that was sort of in this space a little bit. But he really saw the big picture of how you bring these cars to life in a bigger way and make them something bigger, and really drove the whole impetus behind special paint schemes, and his teams would build these big programs. If you remember, like when the Looney Tunes came to track and there were several cars decked out in the Looney Tunes, or Chevy Rock and Roll, or there are lots of different programs, movie programs, because at the time, most cars were sort of single sponsor, and they really were kind of always looking for something a little bit unique and different to try to draw some attention, drive some merchandise sales, put a special story on the track, that caught the attention of the fans, and broadcast. And so he really, he built Action into a giant merchandise company that really had all aspects. I mean, we did everything from, or they did, I was never actually part of Action formally. I was actually a customer of Action's. But they had everything from little trinkety ornaments that you would find in sort of like a Garden Ridge or an at-home type store, or Kmart at the time, to T-shirts that were sold through Walmart and the likes of that, the mass retail side of things, obviously the Diecast. And there was a bit of a competition, because there was this other company called Team Caliber that was out there that was doing it for a handful of teams, particularly the Roush-oriented teams or any of the Roush partner teams. And they were making Diecast, and they had the Team Caliber brand, which was, so it was sort of an arms race. If they put on an extra vent or special engraved piece that was more realistic on the front, Action had to respond by doing something different. And so the collector won in this, because they really kept driving each other to be more realistic, more cool, the ultra collectible car. So he had a big part in it, and his team. And honestly, there are a number of folks that still work for me today that worked under Action in Phoenix, Arizona, that when everything got moved over to North Carolina came out here. So we've got one of our head packaging artists is still from that group. My licensing guy I talked about is still from that group. I've got some sales folks that come out of that same mix. My production team, 3 of them have history with Action. So combined, you could say, Lionel, well, you've been in it for about 10 years. The reality is we've probably got 150 to 200 years worth of experience to add this all up in the Diecast space. So that was kind of part of it. Now you sort of mentioned Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt, and these guys, more Dale, because he was a little more senior than Jeff. Jeff kind of came into the picture in a little bit in the background, or later in the story. But Dale really saw the value of bringing the merchandise and the brand and what he represented and the number 3 to the track. And so he had his own merchandise company. One of the guys that actually runs the RCCA club worked for him. I always tell the guy he must have had child labor issues, because he doesn't seem that old. He's younger than I am. But he's been doing this for so long. He was literally in the warehouse, when Dale was really involved in the merchandise strategy, really sort of grew the trackside business into what it was through others. And then it moved around to multiple companies, multiple representations, but Dale was sort of the impetus for it. The land and building that we're in actually started as a Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon sort of partnership. So they really realized they were businessmen, right? And they were athletes, but they were businessmen, and they understood the value of their name, their brand, what they represented, how you get that directly to the consumer, and really built that fandom that is what they really cherished, which was the following. So it's a very, very long storied history. It's cool, it's colorful. There are a lot of stories, both written and unwritten. It's sort of the urban legend type stuff. There have actually been some books written on it in the past. Nothing in the recent days, but there were certainly some in the past.
Yeah, so they kind of had that persona of going at each other on the track, and they definitely had their fair share of run-ins. But then when it came to the money-making side of the business, they were like, we can put our heads together to make this one work.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stories about those two guys, and both excellent drivers and certainly ambassadors for the sport in different ways. Yeah, from my understanding, and I never saw the two together personally, but my understanding, and there's actually a really awesome cover shot. It was for, I believe, one of the RCCA magazines. It could have been the ARC magazine, the Action Racing Collectibles magazine. But, Dale Earnhardt and Jeff Gordon are on the floor playing with cars on like sort of a big carpet mat type thing. So to have that, and I mean, when you look at it, there's some old catalogs and stuff that go back, and when Kelly and Dale Jr. were part of the business, and they were part of the business. They worked under the Action brand. They're actually some of the models. So when you go back and you look, and they're wearing the outfits and the jackets and stuff like that. So, it's been a family business for the Earnhardts. And honestly, when Dale was driving, I mean, he was, we worked with his licensing representative, but he always had an eye toward, well, what does this mean in terms of how we bring it to the fan, or what's collectible about it, or why is it special? Or I remember him being on QVC talking about like how he wanted the white rockers on the side of the car because, it made it look better and it would look good on diecast and it would help sell it. And so, and they were more expensive, but they had to have them because he was part of that design element, so it was very cool to hear.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's cool about NASCAR, and we talk about it all the time, is it's one of those things that kind of puts the people closer to the fan. There's other sports where if you buy a jersey, the player may not have a hand in it, but to hear something like all these guys who are like, we want to have part in what we're giving to the fan, that just takes NASCAR to a different level, and not only the relatability, but the connection you have to your favorite drivers.
Yeah, I mean, when you really look at it, the sport itself is truly one of the most accessible at the premium level, right? So when you think like, okay, so minor league baseball, yeah, you can get up really close to the players and stuff like that. And Major League Baseball, some stadiums are pretty fan friendly when batting practice and that some of the players come over. But the masses, the amount of people typically that can be on pit road and can be around the action and see these guys, it really is just different. It's different. They consume it. It's a very, racing is a very sort of sensory sport, right? You smell it, you feel it, you hear it. If you're in the wrong spot, you might taste it. Like, right? Like it is like, you're getting hit with, fumes and smoke, and if you're in the pits, there's tire pieces like flying around, and you hear the impact wrenches and guns, and it's just there's just so much going on,
Right.
This sort of organized chaos that happens, and this routine that you just kind of watch, and there's so many people that have access to that, and it builds a fan for life. You can take the most uninterested person in racing, related to racing, to a race, and take them on pit road, and you will turn them into a fan because the experience is just so like enveloping, I've had bankers from New York come down and different things, part of our ownership structure, and they'd never been to a race. And by the time they got done, they want to like chat about, who won this weekend and what's going on. And they were watching.
That's awesome.
It's like I said, it's just one of these things that, it kind of creates fans just because it's so immersive.
So we talk a little bit about how a fan of a specific driver definitely wants to collect those specific unique schemes. Myself, I can appreciate most drivers. And if there's a cool scheme that comes out like Jimmy Johnson just had, I'm definitely all over that. What are some specific things within diecast that collectors are really seeking?
So there's several answers to that. So you're right. We really view it as there's sort of two types of collectors. One is a fan-based collector. Typically, they are driver-focused. They may, to a lesser degree, be team-oriented. So, like, if they're fans of Chase Elliott, right, and they may also be interested in the other Hendrick guys. Once in a blue moon, you'll have, like, Team Chevy, they'll collect Chevy drivers. And then there's what we call the completionist. And so the completionist tends to be more oriented toward our NASCAR Authentics line. And we kind of promote that by the fact that on the back of our 64 scale, there is a checklist of all the different cars that you can get in the wave. And when they go into these stores, and we have videos of it, we've run some contests. I mean, they wipe out the peg. They want all of it. And because of the way that cars are distributed through mass, sometimes a wave of cars will only wind up in certain regions and won't wind up in other regions. And so they make friends with some of these other guys, and then there's like buying co-ops, right? And so like, I'll pick up a few extra of these cars for you, you watch for that for me, and they kind of trade. So it's great. So they're kind of the completionist. Outside of that, on the core driver side, when you talk about our ARC or our elite products, autographs are a big thing. There are some that really want that autograph. Now, a lot of the guys don't want to buy the autograph from us. They want to get the autograph. So they want to take the car there physically themselves. And I don't know if you guys have been to the race and ever noticed, but there's some that have like constructed these coolers with like slots where the cars go in. And honestly, we've interviewed a number of drivers, and they have said, like, when they look and they're walking down a line, they know who's spent money, because the diecast car is the jersey of our sport, right? There really isn't something that's comparable. We used to, back in the action days, and maybe a little bit still to this, but definitely to a lesser degree, there used to be something like a uniform jacket that made the guys look like they were wearing the fire suit. The fans look like they were wearing the fire suit. But we consider the diecast to be the jersey. And so the drivers have said openly that as they're walking down, if somebody's got, the free cards that they hand out at the rigs, or t-shirts or a ball cap, they reach for the diecast, because they know that that's an invested fan. That's somebody who's spent, in the ARC level, you're probably talking $60 to $70. If you're in the elite level, it could be, 100 or more. But autographs, because not everybody can get to the track and has access. So that's a big one. They also look for, in the back window of every car, we put on there what we call the DIN, the diecast identification number. It's much like your vehicle's VIN. It's a combination of the product code, the sequencing of the numbers. Each digit kind of means something. And then the last 4 digits are the car number. So 0001 is car number 1. And so car number 1's highly desirable. People will pay a lot of money for those. Door number cars are also highly desirable. So the 09 in the case of Chase Elliott would be a car that people would want to pick up and would pay a premium for. There's special finishes that are usually much lower runs. Some people like the special finishes. Some people are purists and they don't like the special finishes. They think it should be the way it is, and that's the way it should be. Prototypes. Prototypes are probably, outside of maybe the number 1 and the door number, are probably the most sought after and will command the most premium. Prototypes are something that we do when we make the cars. So the cars go from, we get the artwork from the team. We put it on our template. We send that template out for approval. It's an art file, an electronic file, essentially. That goes to the teams, sometimes a sponsor for approval. Once that comes back, we upload that art to our factory. The factory turns that car goes through a printing process, turns that car into a sample. We typically make 6 of those cars. There are exceptions. Sometimes we'll make a few more. Sometimes we'll make a few less. The really, really valuable cars, quite frankly, are the ones that either radically change from the prototype to the finished good, or are cars that we prototype that we never actually make. And it does happen. It's not very common, and we really do try to control that. But what happens is when we get those prototypes go out for approval. And again, depending on which team, which sponsor, there's a certain number of those cars that have to leave our facility. Typically, it's 2. So there's typically 4 that retain with us and 2 that go out. Those 2 oftentimes, sometimes the drivers want them. Sometimes the drivers' foundations will get a hold of them, and you'll get them through auction sites. Sometimes the licensing group just kind of keeps them all in a big cage, and then they'll do a massive purge. And typically there's these hardcore collectors who know people at certain places, and they'll wind up with them, and so they'll kind of funnel through the same channels. but prototypes tend to command a pretty heavy price tag, particularly if it's a sought after car. And then finally, there's just cars that people love. So like Jimmy Johnson, who obviously is retiring, 7-time champion, probably a feat that will never be repeated. You know, the tribute throwback car to Richard Petty, to Dale, and of course to himself, was a really awesome paint scheme. And it's going to just sell well because it's a really awesome story. There are tribute cars, things like Kobe Bryant this past year. Those sold well because sometimes there are things that extend beyond just the realm of NASCAR or just the realm of a driver.
Right.
Black Lives Matter with Bubba Wallace was a big car this year. The Blue Lives Matter was a big car. There's just different themes that tend to react. Military cars tend to do very, very well within this space. But you never know. Sometimes there's just fluky ones. Maybe it's a one-time car that a driver runs and they maybe win in it, which makes that car pop a little more than it might otherwise. First win cars oftentimes are pretty popular, pretty big, especially if they're a special paint scheme. Those will also be highly sought after. So there's no real particular formula. There's certain things that typically happen. Once in a while, a car will surprise us. You know, it always happens that the most sought after, or, you know, highly sought after cars, like we have literally 12 minutes to figure out how to get it to market before, before you know, we like it when we get it, you know, months in advance. And occasionally that happens. And sometimes we'll even have product there for a special event when it works, when it goes that way. But these days it tends to be that we're getting it very last minute. Just it's the nature of the beast right now in sponsorship and the sport.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there are some of these that it's like a single print, and we saw one that was going for like $7,000. That was like a Dale Senior with Brooks and Dunn under the hood for some reason. So what are some of like the biggest collections? You mentioned when we talked a couple weeks ago, a Jeff Gordon collection that's out there that's massive. What are some of the biggest ones you've seen, and what do people do with these when they move on from the collecting side of things?
Yeah, there was at one point in the past, and probably when QVC was ultra popular with the For Race Fans Only show. It was kind of in the 80s when other things were doing this as well, right? There were trading cards, there was Beanie Babies, there was Diecast Collectibles. All of these were on a bubble that people really, I think, felt that they would have long-term value, and they would treating them like a stock was probably not the right approach, but that they sort of thought like, I'm going to get these things. I'm never going to take them out of the box. I'm going to put them in the top of the closet, and my kid's going to, in 15 years, going to need to go to college. I'm going to take that down and I'm going to go cash that in. And unfortunately that didn't happen for those folks. And really, we always tell people, because a lot of times people will say, hey, what's the value, right? Like what's the value? The value is what it brings to you. So it's the enjoyment that you get out of it. Perhaps the memory that you have, you got that, maybe you took your kid to the race and you bought a special car, and that's more meaningful than any financial sort of aspect to it. But there are some people that have amassed collections that are just phenomenal. The person I was speaking about with the Jeff Gordon, her name is Charlotte. Charlotte is an RCCA member. She's a good friend of the business. We know her well. She had a room in her home dedicated to Jeff Gordon collectible stuff. And these folks, when they're into it this hardcore, they don't just buy diecast. They buy everything Jeff Gordon. So, I mean, if there is like a comforter done, if there was a real car that was done, which there was, you know, they have that. They have sheet metal. They have engine parts. They have shoes, shirts, things he's worn, signs, sunglasses. I mean, you name it, they have it. She was actually featured. So when the Hall of Fame opened up here in Charlotte, she was actually featured as part of the Hall of Fame story on collectors and collecting. And actually one of the guys who worked on the Hall of Fame, Buzz McKim, I actually did a radio show with him called The NASCAR Collector on Sirius XM for a couple of years. We did that, and we would take call-ins and have guys call and talk about their collections, how they got stuff. One of the coolest pieces from that I remember was Dale Jr. used to work up at his dad's auto dealership. He had a Chevrolet dealership, and Dale Jr. used to change oil. And so they did a program that, your Goodwrench technician was, and it was signed Dale Earnhardt or Dale Jr.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't Dale Jr., it was Dale Earnhardt Jr. And that he had that piece from when he had gone to get his oil change, right? And so that was a collectible. We talked about that on the air. Really cool, right? Not a diecast, but still something very, very cool. So yeah, there are guys that are huge fans of just about every driver. We host an RCCA event typically in May. We didn't do it this year, obviously for reasons around COVID. But we have a couple hundred folks come in. We serve lunch. We typically have a driver or two. We have had the likes of Bill Elliott and Chase Elliott. Dale Jr. came a couple of years for us. We've had some Hall of Famers. And they get up and they talk. And we have had some auctions. And we sort of throw a few things in. We'll say, like, all right, these die-casts signed here on stage, 2 hot passes, and something else, right? And these packages will go, and it's all to raise money for a good cause for the foundations that the drivers have. But we've had them go up in the $8,000 range. It's part of it is they're very generous people who have the ability to do that. But it is they're getting a special thing that it's sort of a once in a lifetime type thing. So collectors, value is something that you have to kind of put a value on it in your head, right?
For sure.
What I collect or what you collect, you got to sort of say, what is it worth to you? What enjoyment do you get out of it? And that's the real value.
So when I was growing up, social media was not a thing, and I didn't have anybody to connect with around my own collecting. But nowadays, that's a big part of it, is being able to connect on social media with different fans and talk about their collections and discuss different things. What is it that Lionel is doing on social media to connect with fans, especially younger fans?
So we've we tend to try to do a lot on both the train and the car side as it relates to social media. And each platform sort of has its own sort of demographic, the target audience. We are fortunate on the car side because we do have the club. So we have the racing club, which has its own forum and has a virtual garage aspect to it. And these collectors have kind of built a fan base, and they really kind of did a lot of that before there was social media. But we do engage with influencers. We support different efforts by NASCAR with some of the youth movement stuff to try to get cars in kids' hands. Some of the stop motion stuff that some of these kids do. I don't know if you've ever watched some of these things, but they reenact like maybe the last 3 laps of the race, and it's all stop motion, and they've got them in the right, we've got the right cars in the right order with the right paint schemes on them. Really cool stuff. They're very creative. We've have held some contests where we like show us your ultimate collection. I'm trying to remember the exact name. I can't off the top of my head, but it was, show us you're the ultimate NASCAR Authentics collector. And essentially kids and parents with kids and parents or adult collectors all sort of contributed material to us. And they might've spelled out NASCAR Authentics with cars, or they did stop motion stuff to do that as well. Or they, just creatively hung them on their walls. Like there was one guy that had literally these things pegged every inch of the wall. But it was all the cars on the backer cards. So you really see different ways, different people, celebrate and cherish this stuff. It's really cool. But we're always sort of trying to support and engage and connect with fans in the digital space. It does change collecting. It changes a lot of things. Mm-hmm. The way you go to market, the way you sell, the way we do launch. We have a show called The Fix that we produce internally. There hasn't been any episodes recently because getting people together is only recently are we back in the office. But actually the guy I mentioned who worked for Dale Earnhardt's company is Thomas, who is the host of The Fix. And so You know, he's on there, and he's awesome with the fans. He knows the stuff. He is passionate about it as much as they are, and for him to lead that space really makes a world of sense for us and the brand.
Yeah, and I just recently, so when I purchased that Jimmy Johnson paint scheme, you all had a deal going on the site, and I don't know if you still do, but there are a few different ways that people can become members. And Thomas got the little form in the mail that he had signed and everything. So how can people, one, become a part of the RCCA, and what are some of the benefits that you get when you become a part of that? You already mentioned the big event that you all do for some of those higher end collector members. So
Yeah, so there are, depending on your buying habits, there actually are levels within the RCCA. So the more you buy, the more points you accumulate, and the higher the level goes up. And there are benefits to each tier. I can't off the top of my head sort of speak to exactly what they are. But you get the catalogs, you get the communications from us. We do offer exclusive products time to time, sometimes the autograph stuff, or we may do a variant special finish that's only available through the club that you can kind of get a hold of. Typically, we try to host a couple of events at different tracks. So we'll bring people out and we'll give them, temporary hot passes, give them a little bit of a garage tour, do a meet and greet type thing. That kind of stuff has obviously all been disrupted this year. And, we don't really know what the plan is going forward on that. We, of course, have the big event. That's sort of the big piece. Honestly, the last 5 or so years we've been in Miami. We've had a suite in Miami that you have access to purchase the 3-day weekend, championship weekend, and I was there, and Thomas and others from our sport, and it was a time to kind of mingle with other collectors, other like-minded collectors. We gave away every caution. We'd give away a prototype. So that, that's how some of those cars get out there in the marketplace. There's some of those that they might not be their guy, but they know somebody who wants that or whatever. So there's a really nice, you sort of are part of a community. You can jump on, LionelRacing.com and head over to the RCCA Elite, and be part of that. And I do, like you said, I think there is a couple of different ways. There's a way to pay, but I think if you spend a certain amount, there's also a deal where you can kind of get a free membership. And I believe they are lifetime. So if you're into collecting diecast, it's definitely something you want to check out. The Elites are the premier cars. Mm-hmm. They have the most bells and whistles and the most features. They have the full diecast chassis now, and the more detailed engine compartment, and the opening deck lid. And we're looking at, as you know, the cars are in development for 22 now. It was originally going to be 21. Mm-hmm. So we're in the process of having the conversations internally and with the factories, like, okay, here's the technical data. Here's what the car is going to basically be, the common greenhouse elements. We don't have any of the OEM specific stuff yet, which is basically the front, rear, the windows. You know what it is from this year. But what we're trying to do is figure out how we're going to make the Elite car different from the other car. Well, we still make the other car cool. We just want to make the Elite car just a little cooler, right? So we're kind of trying to figure that out now. And we actually have a really, I'm not gonna spill the beans, but we have a pretty cool concept that ties into the car, the real car, which we've been able to get up close to and kind of see and understand a little bit. And so I think it'll make the Elite car just that much cooler.
Awesome.
To have it when the new ones come out.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's so awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing the complexity of this, because I don't think most people realize that when it comes to product development, it can take from planning to reaching a doorstep or a store years sometimes for that whole process to shake out. But in Lionel's case, a new scheme comes out for Throwback Weekend, and that can be a matter of months. So not only complexity of the ins and outs and the history of it, just so cool to hear. And the best thing that I heard you say is that the value is the joy that it brings to you, because that's what I feel. And I think that's what a whole lot of fans feel So thank you so much for sharing that and spending time with us today. It was so cool to hear that story.
Yeah, absolutely. I've enjoyed it. I love talking about it. I can go on and on, as you can tell, I'm sure. But a long history, and as I said, I'm very passionate about products. Very passionate about the team that I have that does an awesome job on both the car and the train side. I mean, I've got some of the best I've ever worked with in terms of product development, the engineers, the different things we do, and they kind of hate it sometimes, but because the CEO likes to be involved in the product, it's like, hey, what about we try da, 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 and they're like, if you tell me to make another tin, I'm going to shoot you, right? So, because like we figure out like special packaging or whatever to kind of bundle some of these things in. And my one production director in the racing side, she and I have gone round and round on tins for a long time. I was, as a customer, she was my point of contact when I was a customer, so I would be pushing on the customer side, and then now obviously she works for me, and they're great. They do an awesome job. They have to your point about timing. Most consumers who aren't in product don't understand the stuff that you go into Walmart, Target, you see today, wherever you shop, doesn't matter. That stuff started 18 months ago, right? They were in line reviews with buyers, and they were putting ideas on a table, and they were finessing things, and they're taking forecasts, and they're ramping their factory up, and they're putting it on a boat, and they're getting it here, which takes at least 30 days. And then, at least to the East Coast, 30 days. And then, it gets to distribute through the network of their warehouse, the warehouses of the retailers, out to the stores. And a paint scheme comes out that we may not know about, and it happens. Although we have good relationships with the teams, once in a while, they're highly confidential for whatever reason, or it's an opportunity that comes up because something happens that you don't expect. And so we have to start reacting from basically the time everybody sees it on social media for the first time. Our clock starts and people are like, why isn't it here? I don't understand. It's on track. You should be able to build, they built a real car. Yes, they built one real car. Don't take me wrong. I don't want to do what they do, right? But we're trying to make lots of little cars over there. There's a whole line, factory of people. We're trying to move around and shuffle and packaging and approvals and licensing rights. And it's why I'm gray now.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a trip. Well, Howard, we thank you for joining us today. And, we look forward to hopefully getting out to your all's facility once all the COVID stuff's over, and just seeing how you guys work, and encourage everybody else to do so, because it just sounds like an awesome process, and to be able to see it up close would be something awesome.
Yeah, you're more than welcome whenever this all settles down. We certainly we'll take you out to a race or whatever, and hopefully be able to meet in person.